Welcome, fans of Star Trek, to the Captain's Yacht, a production of the newly minted Teachers Talking Trek. Join us as we tour Star Trek's The Next Generation episode by episode. We need all hands on deck as we debate what works about these episodes 30 years later and what hasn't aged so well, awarding and revoking pips as benefits each episode. We'll be asking our audience, that's right, we'll be asking our audience and listeners to rework, rethink, and reimagine various aspects of what doesn't age so well. This we'll call TrekWork and can be submitted to the comments below. Special commendations for those who participate. We're glad to have you here for episode 10 of our study of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1, in which we will review the episodes Coming of Age, Heart of Glory, Arsenal of Freedom. Such power names for episodes this week.
Oh, yeah.
I am at Scholar Beta on all things social media, and I'm here with my co-host, Captain Kanaka. Welcome, my friend.
Glad to be here. I'm glad we're back talking Star Trek, the Next Generation. It was nice doing a little diversion into Picard, but now we're back, and I think we're ready to roll. I'm really looking forward to this.
That's right. That's right. We did have that special 3-episode side trek, as it were, where we explored Picard. But we're back. Captain, why don't you give us a bit of a recap of, what's going on and maybe about the new feature we're adding here.
So what we're dealing with here is we are assigning pips. We had discussed earlier about doing grades. Now we are doing pips. What merits of an episode are better than others? Where are some areas for improvement? And then in the grand scheme of things, doing a military-like setting. That's the deal here. No pips at all as a red shirt crewman. We give pips where appropriate. Half a pip is chief, all the way to Commander-in-Chief of Starfleet, which is the Fleet Admiral 5-pip rating. With that in mind, are we ready to start with Coming of Age?
I think so. Let's do it.
Wonderful. Make it so.
So let's talk Coming of Age. Stardate 41461.2. I'll get us going with a little premise and talking tropes, and then we'll break it down a little further behind the scenes and such. So, okay, what's the premise? Well, while Wesley prepares for and then takes the Starfleet Academy entrance exam, Picard and the Enterprise crew are interrogated and investigated by Admiral Quinn and Lieutenant Commander Remick. What they are searching for remains a mystery. Dun, dun, dun. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So genre, I'm going to go straight up mystery. I would say thriller, but there really isn't that ticking time bomb, that ticking clock that makes a thriller. That kind of gets into the pacing. Maybe we'll talk about that. But genre, straight up mystery. What's Remick looking for? What is on this starship that's so wrong that they're tearing it apart and making everyone anxious? Tropes, we get the Starfleet jerk. I'm going to say Remick is definitely prototype Starfleet jerk. And we get a plot twist. I'll just go ahead and say straight up what it is at the start of our episode. They investigate the Enterprise. They're tearing it apart. They're questioning every captain's log, every crewman's log. And then it's revealed that it's not that they're looking for something really negative, but they're testing to see if Picard is loyal enough to become the Commandant of Starfleet Academy.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of we weren't really investigating you. We were, what's that called when you're digging up dirt on opposition research or something like that?
Exactly.
So that's what we're getting at in this episode. And who's starting us off? Am I taking us for what works and what doesn't?
I'm going to do a little bit of the history
behind the scenes,
here.
Yeah, of course.
So you're going to get a kick out of this. There's a little detail here. First of all, this is the first official episode where Maurice Hurley is fully in charge. A couple other things. The original title of this episode was called Starfleet Academy. This is the part, I think, given your affinity for parts of the ship that you'd find interesting. There was a sort of subplot that was cut for time in this episode, and scenes were written but not filmed involving Wesley's 16th birthday, and they celebrated it on Deck 21 Forward. Yeah. So
10 forward, okay.
But Deck 21 Forward, so it's a predecessor. 21. It's way down at the bottom of the ship, or midpoint of the ship.
Gotcha. Sorry, I think I misheard you there. So you were saying this one take place on 21 Forward.
Yep, which is the predecessor or precursor.
You're right. I do love that detail. I would want to hang out on 21 Forward.
Enterprise interiors is a big thing there, and I figured you'd enjoy that. Because Data is at a birthday party, Data starts asking people how they celebrate their birthdays. Worf gets annoyed and says Klingons don't celebrate birthdays, which kind of would set up the trope of Klingons don't do this, Klingons don't do that. And then Data asks how old he is. Worf replies he doesn't know. Worf counters with to Data about his age, and Data responds, I have no age. It's an interesting little scene, cut for time, but it's kind of interesting in terms of world building, in terms of putting things into context, into focus. Good stuff there.
Yeah, so, that is cool. I like 21 Forward a lot. Dude, you know me too well. You know me too well.
I had a feeling you'd enjoy it. So with that said, I think you're kicking us off here. What works about this episode? And forgive me, because of the way the camera's working, I can't see you. So I'm just going to keep going. Yeah, I know. Can you see me?
Yeah, you good. You good. I'm ready to go. Yeah, I love it.
Okay, so with that said, what works for you, Scholar Beta, about this episode?
So you know me, I'm always tracking themes and what I'm like to call theme seeds. You know, not exactly fully developed ideas on these themes, but the beginnings of them. And so, okay, one of the theme seeds I see planted here is that with these crewmen and Wesley, they're in the dark, but they're not stumbling. Actually, I don't know why I'm saying crewmen. Just the Enterprise crew, they're in the dark, but not stumbling. So this episode is all about how they work when they're in the dark, about their goals and the outcomes, right? Picard and the Enterprise on the ship versus Wesley preparing for and taking the exam. Neither are given complete information, but we get to see how they react authentically. And Wesley does pretty well. So does Picard and the crew. They remain loyal. They stand up for Picard, and they question the merits of the investigation, but are, you know, as Starfleet officers, still helpful. And so they kind of ride that tension that occurs in the Picard Enterprise part of the episode. So I appreciate that idea. Next thing that I really like is the shuttlecraft rescue. I love this scene where Picard helps Jake Curlin. So let's break down what happens exactly. So Picard's on the bridge, Remix, you know, asking him a billion questions, taking all these notes on his pad, being really annoying. And Jake Curlin steals a shuttlecraft. And Picard, under pressure from Remix, saves Curlin, again proving he's great with kids. You know, I don't know what Picard's thing is. You're great with teenagers too. You can teach high school, man. Anyways, you could read this incident as facing your fears and not running away from them, but I think that's too simple of a reading, a way too simple reading. And I think this connects with what you were saying about the title of the episode being about Starfleet Academy. This is all about testing your intelligence, in my opinion. And we all have gifts that schools and exams cannot evaluate. And that's what Curlin's dealing with at the beginning of the episode. Oh man, I'm not good enough for Starfleet. I'll never get in. You know, kind of a little foreshadowing to what's going to happen to Wesley. However, you know, there's a piece of dialogue spoken by Geordi. I think this is key. You know, they're trying to lock down Curlin before he can escape the Enterprise and the shuttlecraft, and he's going to go run off and join a freighter and be like a worker. You know, he's just going to put his head down and work now that he flunked out of naval college or could never get in. And Geordi, as Curlin's overriding all the mechanisms and lockout, says, smart kid. And I feel like, I know that's like a very small thing, but to me, this shows Curlin's resourcefulness, skill, forward thinking. It's someone in Starfleet that recognizing this, but it also shows that Curlin's got a lack of a place to grow. And maybe if he would have had a different type of exam or evaluation, like this is his way of showing how intelligent he is. This guy can break into a secure hangar bay, steal a shuttlecraft, escape, and also listen to the orders of his commanding officer to save his life when he lacks experience. So anyways, my thing, I just love that scene. I love what I think it communicates about Curlin being a gifted person and being able to show his intelligence in other ways. Even though he is stealing a shuttlecraft. But Picard doesn't really reprimand him there at the end. He doesn't add an additional like intense punishment on top of it. You know, I think the life lesson kind of stood for itself, if you ask me. Okay, last thing I want to say that I just absolutely love about this episode is Mordok. One of my absolute favorite aliens in all of Trek and all of TNG. I love the prosthetic. I love the amphibian/reptilian look, but also contrasted with the brainy personality. That breathing, moisturizing device, whatever it is, I have no idea. He's got a really dry nose, so he constantly has to be like, you know, I don't know. But I love the Mordok strategy that Wesley, you know, introduces and drops. It's all awesome. It's all awesome. I give this character the title of a child of Enterprise. The Enterprise, you know, even though he doesn't serve on it, he's an amazing drop in TNG. I'd love to go off and watch, you know, read the standalone novels about him. That's what I've got. That's what's really working for me. Kind of that stumbling in the dark, not really knowing what your goals are, that shuttlecraft rescue, and that awesome alien, Mordok, who's a Benzite.
Yeah,
His name is Mordok. Yeah.
Benzite. So with that said, I had a question. I love your assessment of this character, the character who steals the shuttlecraft. I don't even remember his name.
Jay Curland, yeah.
Jay Curland. Do we ever see him again?
I
don't think we do.
I would rely on you for that info, but I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of demonstrates my point. But I love your analysis on him and how he didn't get into the academy. I have some notes on that too. So with that said, what doesn't work for you about this episode?
Okay, I'll be brief here. There's just one big thing, and that is that I am really annoyed with the Starfleet entrance exam. Okay, this is a utopian Navy college, I guess. You know, you have majors, but you also are learning military strategy and military history, and you get a military rank, but sometimes you study things that you would not study in the military. So I'm just going to call it a utopian Navy college. And it appears that you need scientific knowledge, logic, eye-hand coordination, and some type of psychology role-playing simulation to get in. And I really hope in the future that we are not using standardized tests to measure this. That is the most depressing idea, that in the future, to get into an elite school, you're going to have to go into a room and take standardized tests. And I hate that idea with every fiber of my being. I know it's it's not even necessarily implied in this that it is, but I'm just, as a teacher, I look at kids sitting at a desk and I can't help think Oaks, smarter balance. I just can't. Oh, those are tests, my friend. Test kids take on computers for hours and weeks at a time that interrupt their junior year for 2 weeks. Anyways, I hope in the future that we have elite schools, but we don't have elite schools that require testing to get into. This is a post-scarcity society. I can't mention. So why are tests? Our sorting mechanisms, present tense, because elite institutions that we have, entrance requirements do not have the capacity to take every student on. It's a fact of scarcity. But we don't. But Star Trek is a post-scarcity society. So that is my only gripe with this episode, is that testing aspect really gets me down. I hate that idea a lot. That's all.
You have a really good point there, and I have I interpret that a little bit differently, and I'm looking forward to sharing that.
Should I give you my pips? Okay, so my pips, I'm saying 2 solid pips and 1 outline. Therefore, this is a lieutenant commander, just like Remick. Okay? I love those themes. Love that shuttlecraft rescue and Mordok. That's definitely worth 2 solid pips. Weak entrance exam testing, outlined pip. 2.5.
I like it. So with that in mind, I'm going to get into mine a little bit. I also am giving lieutenant commander to this. It's interesting that you and I are on the same wavelength there. Yeah, it's funny because a revision to the format is we don't share our notes before. So I'm so thrilled that we're on the same wavelength there. So here is my criteria for why this works. The best part about this is the world building of how Starfleet works. Now, as a person who has, between the two of us, more exposure to military stuff, several members of my in-law family are in the military. I have personal members of my family who are in the military. I approach this from a different aspect. The Academy is awesome in the sense that it's for the quote-unquote best and brightest, analogous to West Point and Annapolis of modern times. As a person who dabbled a little bit in attempting to get into Annapolis, and seeing people who went through that process, it's interesting seeing how that tradition carries over and the burden that carries. Because the argument is, if you're going to put somebody in charge of an aircraft carrier in modern times, or a starship that carries materials that could blow up entire star systems, you got to have somebody who's disciplined and fits a very specific kind of criteria. And one of the greatest criticisms about the J.J. Abrams Star Trek is that Kirk, in that timeline, in that universe, is able to get into the Academy without even registering. He just gets on a shuttlecraft, and 5 minutes later, screen time, he's in his 3rd year. So from my perspective, that's why original Trek is better than new Trek in that regard. I also like the examination of Wesley's psyche building up to the big test, the psychology test. which, if I remember correctly, this is in reference to, or I got a really strong vibe from that episode, Bread and Circuses, where Kirk's classmate from the academy washes out because he failed to do a similar test. He failed to perform on a similar psych eval. Do you remember that, Scholar Beta?
No, not at all.
Okay, well, that's the background for his character, David Maricus. He is not able to complete his academy training because of his poor performance on the psych eval, which is very similar to what they have here in this episode. I also like the scenario. You talk about standardized tests in this, and that is true. There are standardized tests, but I get the impression, and my experience in ROTC in high school backs this up, of everything being a test, not just the sit down at a computer and take standardized tests one. Case in point, there's a cultural fluency test where where Wesley runs into a guy with the hands. Wesley quickly picks up on the fact that he needs to be aggressive to this particular species because showing courtesy is a sign of weakness in that culture. And that makes it a test. That reminded me of two different scenarios. When I was the Command Master Chief Petty Officer in my high school's ROTC program, Naval ROTC program, Junior Reserve. And there are two tests that we do. There's one that's called Mini Boot Camp, which is boot camp for the enlisted kids, but also a boot camp of a different sort for the executive staff, the officers and chief petty officers, and how everybody learns through that process. And the instructors, one of which was a command master chief, the other was a colonel and then a lieutenant commander, offer suggestions and try to enhance our command skills. And all these are scenarios built to test organization and cohesion. So I like that. But all this fails, or rather falls, into the background compared to the final scene with Wesley and Picard. I am going to say, maybe this is because we've been talking about Picard up until this point. When I saw that scene, I straight up said, this is the best singular scene in Star Trek Next Generation Season 1 up until this point, where Picard shows his vulnerability and says, I didn't get into the academy the first time either, but I took it and I improved and I got in the second time. I absolutely love that. Gives a humanizing flaw to Picard and builds rapport with Wesley, where it was kind of rocky and touch and go up until that point. That's what works for me. What doesn't work is, and I'm curious what your perspective is on this, the storytelling structure falters significantly.
Yeah.
The relationship between Wes and that kid who stole the shuttle, kind of jarring. I didn't know what was going on at first. Wes going into academy testing, kids stealing the shuttle, and then you have the Inspector General of Picard's going through Picard's crew and giving this sort of Inquisition thing. A lot of points are in conflict with each other there. There's not really cohesion, and more importantly, the IG's investigation, I think, is the worst part of this, because it talks about relationships being put to the test, but and Picard discloses this to Admiral Quinn, but we don't see, there is not a single scene where it's established that there is a relationship to begin with. They don't sit back and talk about, remember that time at the academy where we met Boothby or whatever, and we pulled a fraternity prank or whatever. A scene like that would have made it perfect, but we'd rather have or double down on this Inquisition with the Inspector General character, and do that over and over and over again, which I guess serves a specific purpose. That's not developed, and it sets up an arc with Conspiracy, and I know the history of Conspiracy. I'm looking forward to talking about that. I think that would have had a far better payoff if you know what the character relationship is between Picard and Quinn ahead of time. Also, go ahead.
I'll grant you that. I'll absolutely grant you that there is really nothing between Quinn and Picard to test that friendship. Yeah, I think I want to say like that's just tacked on, to make the scene in in Quinn's quarters a little more dramatic. Though it's pretty flat. I love your insights in the academy. I want to add a couple things, but finish up. What else does not quite working for you?
My final thing is the plot resolution of Wesley not getting into the academy after a narrative leading everything to the contrary is unforgivable. It could have been fixed with a single line of dialogue. That's going to be a theme in these next couple episodes. A single line of dialogue could have fixed all of this, and they kind of get to that. They allude to that at the end where Murdoch says, "I don't deserve this." Wesley does, but it's not clear. The cultural fluency test, Murdoch saying, "I couldn't have done that." Wesley going out of his way to help Murdoch in one of the computerized tests.
Yeah.
All of this builds up a narrative that says Wesley's got this in the bag, but Wesley can't have it in the bag because if he did, he'd have to leave the show. So if they did a thing, if they had one line of dialogue saying, "Oh, Murdoch scored half a point higher here or there or whatever," that would have made it clearer. So that's my deal. Yeah. What are your closing thoughts on this, Scholar Beta?
Okay, so I really do appreciate you giving me a little more perspective on kind of how you see it as a military, Starfleet as a military college. So thank you for that. I do like that. And I do want to say that, yeah, I think the psych test is the most interesting. It's standard insofar as everyone takes it, but it's completely personalized insofar as it's about your psyche, which is kind of creepy that they are able to put that test together before you become a member of this institution. However, I understand. I am not against elite quality schools. I'm against elite schools and tests that sort people out of those. Elite as an exclusive. You know what I'm saying? And I don't see a place for, I see a place for a school with requirements for like engineering. Absolutely. I do not see a place where generally to get into Starfleet, though, it is standardized knowledge. I feel like there's so many resources that anyone who would want to begin their journey potentially could. And so I'm on for the psych test, but I'm very skeptical of the other scenes that take place where they're sitting at the computer. Right. It's too reminiscent of what's going on right now. You know what I'm saying?
Totally hear you on that. You don't question that in a military like setting. It's just you do it. And I definitely see the other perspective on that.
Okay, one more question for you. What do you think would have happened do you think it would be better if Wesley failed the psych test? Do you think that would have made a better resolution and made it more acceptable? Because then he would have had a little more similarity with Picard because they both failed something.
Exactly. I would have liked that a lot. If they had brought up something similar to that, to the circumstances, and I guess they tried doing this, because he makes reference to his father's death, and he draws parallels at the end of the test to Picard. I think that's really great, because he says, just like what Captain Picard did and then his voice trails off. I think that's what they were getting at there.
Yeah.
And if he had failed that, I think that would have done wonders for his character, examining his psyche and given him a bigger obstacle to overcome. And that kind of deflates the whole wonderkin stereotype that Wesley Crusher has, where he can never handle anything. I would have loved that. That's the one great revision there. I love that. I think that would have been a great addition there.
One more cherry on top. One second. One more cherry on top would be make it a scenario that's reminiscent of Jack Crusher's death, but we don't know yet. That will come up later.
I think that's what they were going for, though.
I know, but I want the Easter egg planted and then revealed in canon.
Gotcha.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's keep going. What's your Trek work, my friend? Let's break to the next part before we get too off the rails.
So let's talk Trek work real quick. So here's the scenario. You're at Starfleet Academy. Who is your advisor and what's your major? Now, I've given this a lot of thought because I have very little to do anywhere else because of the pandemic. I was thinking command, but then I decided to change things up. And because of my affinity for time travel, I told the student recently that I've been trying to solve time travel forever. I'd love to do temporal mechanics instead of command, and I'd love Data to be my advisor. That's my dream scenario. What would be yours, Scholar Beta?
You took my advisor, my friend. No, I'm just I like what if we were competing temporal majors? However, my advisor was Spock.
Oh, that's even better.
but I get Zachary Quinto Spock, so I'm at a slight disadvantage. I love you, Zachary Quinto, but I get Zachary Quinto Spock, who has somehow fallen out of the Kelvin timeline. Anyways, okay, can I hit us up with some matte paintings? Is it cool?
Yeah, make it so, buddy.
Okay, my friends, we have matte paintings. Remember, before there was CGI in Picard, there were matte paintings, and we have Relva 7, the location of Wesley's Starfleet Academy entrance exam, and then there's a hallway. Ooh, a hallway inside the exam building. That's where the encounter that you talked about, where Wesley identified the guy with the webbed hand, goes down. That is a great scene. You're absolutely right about that. That is a great scene. And then, okay, I'm gonna put you on the spot, Captain. What type of shuttlecraft did Mr. Curlin steal? Do you know?
Oh boy.
You
I'm
can
sure
do it, my friend.
In terms of class.
No, they don't say. They don't say. Yeah, it's a number. Type what?
Oh, I don't know. I was funny you bring that up because during that time I was actually cooking Hasperat. I have a recipe for Hasperat and Klingon blood pie, and I was making those while that episode was going. So you got me. What type of ship is
And
it?
you have permission to put me on the spot and ask me a completely meaningless trivial factoid, but it's a Type 7, and that's our Enterprise interior. Technically not the Enterprise, but a shuttlecraft on the Enterprise. Well, outside when Curlin steals it. Here he is, Mr. Curlin, in a Type 7 shuttlecraft. There's the interior. Pretty minimal, my friends. First shuttlecraft interior we're going to get in TNG. It's awesome. It's amazing. And now it's safely back in the main shuttle bay.
Awesome. So are we ready to set up for Heart of Glory?
I think so, my friend.
Awesome. And I love
it's been a lovely return to TNG with I just want to point that out.
It absolutely has. And thank you for putting me on the spot on the shuttlecraft thing. I didn't realize.
No, I think you got beef now with me. I know you're gonna throw me a curveball here soon, and I'll do my best to hit it.
We'll get them. So with that said, let's start Heart of Glory.
Here we go. Heart of Glory. Stardate 41503.7. Premise. The Enterprise finds the remains of a battle-beaten freighter with 2 Klingons hiding aboard. I'm going to say for the genre, this is a mystery science action piece. The mystery of what the Klingons are doing out there, what happened in that battle. We figured that out. The science fiction action piece being the shootout, the escape from the security area. It's not the brig. We'll talk about that later. So yeah, that's what I'm going for. That's what I think they're going for, that mystery science fiction action. Tropes, I thought about this, but I think, this establishes the death howl. At least in TNG, I'm not sure if it's established in a film or TOS or no. Okay. So yeah, the death howl, and then obviously a huge Star Trek trope, the distress signal. That's how it all starts out. So those are kind of 2 tropes that I picked up on that I really appreciate. So my friend, what do you got for behind the scenes? How'd this thing come to be? What do you got for us there?
What we have here is the episode credits Maurice Hurley as the writer, but that's not technically true. Its earliest outline and origins are tied to a DC Fontana Herbert J. Wright script entitled Once a Klingon. And you and I have talked about the absence of Worf, the absence of his agency in the show up until this point. There's a very specific reason for that, and it has to do with what is referred to as springboards, or as I called them, commandments for Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry had a commandment. We mentioned earlier that his commandments were there's no jealousy, there's no conflict between characters, no money, all those sorts of things. Another commandment that he had was no Klingons.
Gene Roddenberry loves guiding documents.
Yep.
The Constitution, the Prime Directive, this set of commandments now. No Klingons, that's terrible.
Well, I have a theory for that. He didn't come up with Klingons. Gene Kuhn, his producer, did. And that's the only time in which Gene Roddenberry gave credit to somebody else or something. I just learned about that. I'm doing a public history project right now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I love that title, too, that Once a Klingon. That is, I think that fits so much better for this episode, honestly, than Heart of Glory. But I
agree with you on that.
We'll get into that later. We'll get into that later, yeah. I'm sorry.
The other reason why, and this is something that I thought was rather interesting, and this kind of reverberates into Arsenal of Freedom. Bob Justman, the producer who famously found Picard, amongst other things, said the script was too expensive. The visual effects and makeup budget and overtime pay for guest stars made the episode unfilmable. And when you take into account that this is the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation, there's a lot of overhead there. There's all the models, there's all the effect shots, so that definitely makes sense there. Since Maurice Hurley was the showrunner, he's somehow made it work. I'm very curious. I think at the expense of Arsenal of Freedom, but that's my deal there. Also, folks, there are so many scripts that were pitched for Next Generation and all these other shows that were not produced at all. Heart of Glory is lucky in this regard. There are TOS sequels and also episodes that are funny on one hand and deadly serious on the other. There's an Elvis Meets the Enterprise episode with a script, but there's also an episode entitled Blood and Fire, which tackled the AIDS epidemic in 1987. If any of you are interested in that, I am tentatively planning a sort of public history project on these kinds of episodes. Let me know what you think about that. One last thing. This is the first Next Generation episode to be submitted for the Emmys for consideration.
Really?
Yep, for best editing. So it's something technical.
Oh, okay.
Something really
editing. Okay. I'll save my comments for later.
To each their own. So what works? I think I'm running point on this one.
Let's hear it, my friend. Yeah.
What's good about Heart of Glory? This is the first episode in Star Trek history to attempt to explore Klingon culture.
Mm-hmm.
And in the original series, they're mustache-twirling villains. This is why when you asked about the Death Howl, I knew, because up until this point, they appear in Trouble with Tribbles, they appear in Errand of Mercy, The Savage Curtain, and Friday's Child. So that's only a handful of episodes out of the 70-odd episodes that they do that are of Star Trek, the original series. Their appearance gets an upgrade in the movies. You see them in motion picture. You see their ships in Wrath of Khan. And Krug is the main antagonist for Star Trek 3, and they use the Klingon bird of prey in 4. Star Trek 5 has not come out yet. It's in production, but it hasn't come out yet. And Undiscovered Country, which really cements Klingon culture, doesn't come out until 1991, and this episode is released in 1988. In so many ways, it serves as a foundation for awesome future stories. There's legends and rituals, and the development of a warrior's code. Cowards take prisoners, Klingons do not. Prejudice against the Ferengi. That's brought up a little bit in Last Outpost. It's expanded a little bit more here. I kind of had a Mandela effect. I thought that they had drinking songs in this one. They don't, but eventually drinking song. It's also the first proper Worf episode because it examines Worf's identity, backstory, and relationship with Klingon culture.
Oh, yeah.
The question, has Starfleet tamed you, or have you always been docile? Really good question, really good point of criticism, and that serves as a springboard for the audience to learn how Worf operates. His monologue at the end in Engineering, wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Mentions his brother, later played by Paul Sorvino, who was in Goodfellas. I think that's interesting. Worf's orphan origin story is actually told, which was never mentioned before. Also, he's a progressive Klingon, leave the past in the past. And the last thing that's good about this episode, that's not Worf related or Klingon related, is you get to see in Geordi vision. You get.
Oh, you like that?
When I got a criticism about that too. I got a criticism about that too. It's one of my biggest gripes. But with that said, growing up, I had always wondered, since Geordi was blind, what his visor looked like, and for better or worse, now I know.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
That's what works for me. What are your thoughts on that, Scholar Beta?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm going to touch on a couple of those in mine. And I really just want to add to the discussion on Geordi because I think they were going for like he sees differently, and that's why they were trying to patch that vision through. And I think that's that comes across in some of the dialogue between Picard and some of Patrick Stewart's acting, like, oh, he sees in a different, not necessarily superior or inferior, but a different way, It's powerful. He can see like a rupture in the bulkhead. Not even Data can do that. So I think that part is cool. I think it's just when you look at it on the screen, it looks very hard to see what's going on. And so for the audience, it makes it harder. It doesn't add information as much as it's the mystery is kind of cool. You were a kid, you like the mystery. Anyways,
definitely. When you're a
love
kid,
your other points though. Yeah,
that's a good point. So what doesn't work for me here, folks, is this right here. This episode is extremely gimmicky, and the Geordi Vision thing is one of the biggest gimmicks. It breaks the narrative thrust during the rescue mission because instead you have this narrative thrust or momentum going towards who are these people on this freighter but then we have to stop for what does Geordi see? What does Commander Data look like on Geordi's visor and Commander Riker and the bulkhead thing? One last thought about the way they treated Geordi's vision. I always thought that they turn what could be perceived as a weakness as a strength through lines like not even Data can do that, or it's remarkable that you can see XYZ thing. But in the context of this story, completely breaks the narrative thrust. It gets a little meta. Data mentions that Romulans might be behind the attack, and Picard goes, now there's a name we haven't heard in a while. Even though in Angel 1, the Ferengis who were supposed to attack a starbase are replaced with Romulans in that episode. So it's kind of interesting seeing what happens there. Other gimmicks, they really want a saucer separate. They do. And I have this underlined in with 3 lines in my notebook here. Why is saucer sep so tactically advantageous? I'll bring that up in Best of Both Worlds, because that one of the biggest flaws about Saucer Sep is mentioned there. Finally, the camera does an extreme close-up on the characters when somebody says Klingons for the first time. Really gimmicky. Another thing, it's not a deadly sin, but it's worth mentioning. They recycled footage from the motion picture.
Yes.
Yeah, the Klingon battle cruiser. It's not a deal breaker for me. For some people, it is. I don't mind it, but it is. It technically qualifies as a weakness. In their defense, the motion picture from which the footage originated was, for its time, the most expensive single movie ever made. So it's okay to reuse that costly footage, especially with something that's sci-fi oriented like Star Trek. With that said, all told, I'm giving this one 2 solid pips. That's a full lieutenant. It's a good examination of Klingon culture. Would have loved to have seen more, but it's hampered by gimmicks and a slackened narrative, specifically in the first 3 of 5 acts. It kind of kicks up at the end. One last gimmick that just came to mind: that little belt buckle that they have somehow is a disruptor. No. Yeah, that's silly. That's my thoughts there. What are your thoughts, Scholar Beta?
Okay, so coming in a little under your rating, I'm going to hit this one up. I'm going to say solid thematic ideas executed at a snail's pace. I'm going to say 1 solid pip, 1 outline. Rank, lieutenant, junior grade.
Okay.
So, let's talk about those thematic ideas. That really connects to what you were talking about with Klingon culture. But I really actually like these 2 characters specifically that join Worf on the Enterprise. Chorus is one. What's the other one's name? Do you remember? I can't remember his name.
Yeah,
no idea.
That's the point.
Okay. So I do like Chorus a lot, though. So I think what those 2 Klingons are trying to do, right? Those are basically, and forgive me if this is not appropriate, but I think they're MAGA Klingons. They want to go back to the days of violence, of brutality, of a war-dominated society. They want to make Kronos great again. Seriously, that's what they want. And when I saw it, it just clicked immediately, and it was so identifiable. It made me love the characters even more because of how I just feel like it's so apropos. So I think investigating this idea, why people / Klingon identities are so tied to the past, is very appropriate to today. And this is contrasted heavily with the Klingon commander Kynira condemning the Klingon's point of view. He's the one who arrives on the battlecruiser to pick them up and is going to execute them in an un-Klingon way. That Klingon even has an open mind and says, Worf, you should come join me when your tour is over. That's never going to happen again. Worf becomes just, everybody's every Klingon's target for a cheap shot as TNG goes into the future. So the way I'm reading the Klingons in this episode, you do have this kind of progressive sect, and then you have this sort of, trapped in the past sect, and that just seems like something that we need to talk about in this society. I think there's an amazing exchange between Chorus and Worf at the very end, and I've pulled the lines from the script because I really liked it. This is after basically Worf confronts him by the warp core and says, dude, there is no stealing the Enterprise and going off on glorious missions. That's not going to happen. And Chorus says, living among these humans has sucked the Klingon heart out of you. You are a sham. My words were dust upon the ground. Your blood has no fire. You are weak like them. I don't care what you look like. You are no Klingon. That was awesome. I stopped the episode, took notes on that, went and found it in the script. That came across as like quasi Shakespearean to me. I love the metaphor. My words were dust upon the ground. Your blood has no fire. Oh man, that's great. Whew. I like that. That's good writing to me. And then Worf says, "No, I'm not a Klingon," and shoots him, but he falls through the glass and dies. And I thought, whoa. That is what a way to. I understand they had to end the scene, but what a way to end it. So honestly, this starts a pattern of Picard being completely okay with Worf murdering other Klingons, which is going to happen later in TNG as well. So it's not exactly a warrior's death what Worf gives Chorus. It's because Chorus isn't armed and attacking him really. Chorus is just really depressed, and then Worf shoots him. So I love what they're going for, but I understand the restrictions, and I'm going to be empathetic with the showrunners and interpret that scene a little beyond the context of what they're giving us, because I really love that idea. The kind of duality in Klingon society. Okay,
that's a good point.
I got one more too, and this is a biggie. Okay. Discussion of battle tactics. So Worf really pays attention to how these two Klingons, it's the one Chorus and the other dude whose name we can't remember, took down the Klingon ship that came after them. Okay, so these two Klingons were on this freighter, and they made it appear as if all the systems were failing, and they chose not to restore power on purpose and power back up the shields or power back up the phasers because they know the enemy would see that. So they wait for the enemy to drop their shields when they're going to be boarded. And then right then and there, they go boom, 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 boom on the keyboard, power everything back up and blow the enemy up. That is something Worf is going to do in season 4, Redemption, when he's the weapons officer on Gowron's ship. And yeah, I love that battle tactic, and I love that it comes back. And I think maybe it's used in TOS, and I never picked up on it, but I thought that was pretty cool, and I want to give points to the writer for coming up with that.
Love it.
And that writing that Chorus gives right before he gets murdered by Worf.
Thank you for copying that, because that was what I was mentioning in the climax. I love that scene, but I didn't write down the lines. Thank you for doing that.
Oh, man, that is good. Do I have time to give some criticisms of this episode?
Yeah.
Is there any time left?
Real quick.
Okay, so I said that the pacing's really slow, and the whole Geordi's visor thing is basically, it doesn't help it at all. It's totally disconnected from the rest of the story. It doesn't come back. It's not helpful. It doesn't solve anything at the end. It's just there to pad it out. So that pacing really, really hurts. I also think the suspense is pretty half-baked. I don't want to be prejudiced against Klingons, but when you're finding two hiding in a ship that's almost destroyed and they didn't come out to ask for help or anything like that, and they're giving less than forthcoming answers, I'm pretty suspicious, and I was thinking these are kind of bad news. These two are kind of bad news from the start. And then my very, very, very final thing, can you really just shoot a phaser at the warp core and it will blow up? That seems like a huge design flaw. How about a glass tube? Or something like that, or transparent aluminum or anything. That seems like a humongous design flaw. Geordi, you should get on that ASAP.
In their defense, it'd be like going to one of the cores on a nuclear aircraft carrier and fracturing the shielding, which may not necessarily cause an explosion, but would cause other problems. I bought that, but I agree. It does sound like a design flaw on paper without explanation. But that kind of plays into a trope, because that comes up again with First Contact, where they have to puncture the plasma coolant tanks without using phasers. It's interesting you brought that up. I totally agree with you on that. That is a design flaw.
So closing thoughts, I think. What TrekWork you got for us?
Okay, so they talk about legends that people can write. So today's TrekWork, for this episode at least, is there something from your life, an event from your life around which Klingons would write a song, a legend that could be done as a song? Having grown up on a cattle ranch there's one event that I think would be truly Klingon. And that event is I was helping somebody. There was a 600-pound, soon-to-be steer that was blind in both eyes, lost in a blackberry thicket.
Ooh.
And yeah, it was a full-on blackberry thicket. You stood up and then you still saw branches. And it was my job to go through there. And it was one of the hottest times of the year, but I still wore a plaid shirt to keep the barbs off my skin as much as possible. And they could call it the Day of Blood and Berries, because once I finally got through, it looked like I lost the fight with the chainsaw at the end of it. But we got the deed done. The cow, who was the steer, who was blind in both eyes, ran towards me. I stood my ground. I took it in the chest, and I wrapped my arms around its neck, and we thrashed around long enough for people to get the rope and haul the steer to safety. That would be my Klingon legend.
Raising a glass of bloodline to you, my friend.
There you go, blood wine.
Drink deep. That is a hero's tale right there.
There you go. What are your closing thoughts, Scholar Beta?
For our simple Enterprise interior, we're going to go to a very specific section of the bridge. Bridge main viewer, specifically Geordi vision versus normal vision. We've got the first frame here, Picard seeing the freighter through Geordi's vision. Second frame, we see that the commander of the battlecruiser, who's come to reclaim those two Klingons, but then decides, I don't want their empty vessels. You go ahead, dispose of them, put them in your replicators. They'll become your Earl Grey tea later. Just saying. All right. And one more interior. It's not the brig, it's the security area. The script describes it this way. It says the Klingons are placed in what serves as a security holding area. Force field surrounds the door. 2 guards are left outside. I like that they acknowledge it's definitely not the brig. It's a security area, basically a closet with a force field.
There you go. So, with that said, really good examination of Klingon culture. Are we ready to beam out and go to Arsenal of Freedom?
I think so. Our final episode on this tour.
Energize. So, with that said, Arsenal of Freedom, Scholar Beta, what's the story here?
Arsenal of Freedom, taking place on stardate 41798.2. The Enterprise explores the planet Minos. A civilization undone by its own advanced weaponry, in this case the Echo Papa 607, which is still online and searching for a new target after all these years. Dun dun dun! So I'm saying this is a classic Trek. This is straight up space mystery. You're going along in space when all of a sudden it's a society blown away by its own weaponry. So you got this kind of Skynet situation, technology overthrew the people who created it in a very violent way, I would imagine. That's one of our main tropes. Saucer separation is a trope in this one. We finally get to see it, and it's in all of its excitement. And I actually have something to say about it. I kind of appreciate the way it's used. It's like, get the civilians out of here. That seems like the only real reason you'd use it.
Absolutely.
Which I think is awesome. But then there's where the phaser arrays Gene Roddenberry on the drive section. Anyways, so then there's another trope, a role reversal. Captain becomes the doctor, one of my least favorite parts of the episode. And then there's the Starfleet jerk, chief engineer who comes to the bridge to challenge Geordi's. And another chief engineer.
Yep, another. They got a revolving door there. So, would you like me to go over backstory now?
Yeah. Does this one have a storied history? What'd you learn about it?
Actually, it does. Bob Lewin, one of the producers and head writers, actually wanted this episode to explore the relationship between Picard and Crusher. Roddenberry nixed it, frustrated. Went to the point where he actually left the show. One of our head writers, our producers, ends up leaving the show as a result of this. Also, there
was that guy's name again?
Bob Lewin, Robert Lewin.
Bob Lewin, awesome.
There's a scene where Crusher reveals her true feelings for Picard. It was written. Picard in the original, one who was mortally wounded in the scenario. But that scene was cut. Also, the most important part of this backstory, this, just like Angel 1, this episode did not have a completed script. And production actually shut down several times because of that. And it kind of shows in this episode. Finally, the sand pit where Crusher and Picard are trapped was it was infested with fleas.
Yeah.
They hated the pit. I don't blame them.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that's what I read too, and that sounds horrible. I'm very sorry to Gates McFadden and Patrick, especially Gates McFadden. You had to lay in that. Ugh.
Definitely. So, what works for you, Scholar Beta, in this scenario?
Okay, I'm liking the theme or the ideas that are explored around the weapons turning on their creators. It's not explored much, but it is definitely brought up. And this is a classic science fiction premise dating back, honestly, to one of the first instances of robots, a play by a playwright named Karl Čapek, and a Czech playwright. And they're not weapons per se, but they're robots, basically slaves, and they rise up against their masters and, obliterate the human population. And in this case, the people of Minos created these weapons that adapt. Doesn't that sound familiar? And become too perfect of killing machines. And this is combined with an investigation. If this were combined into an investigation via drones, because that's basically what the Echo Papa is, I think it would have been stronger, because that's really terrifying to me. And I think drones are kind of a new frontier in warfare and kind of nullify infantry, basically. And that's basically what the Echo Papa was showing us it was doing, or makes it more difficult for infantry to move around the field and be useful. But anyways, I just think if we could explore that theme a little bit more, or the implications of the Echo Papa a little bit more, I think that would make it stronger, but it is brought up. It is part of the episode. And then one more thing I'll say that I appreciate about this is Geordi's decision to enter the atmosphere to negate the cloaking device on the Echo Papa model that's flying and following the Enterprise in space. To me, I like that tactic. I like that maneuver. I'm not sure from like a scientific point of view if that makes sense or not, but I don't really see anything wrong with it on the surface. And at least it's an attempt to use tactics instead of just, I think the exact polar opposite of that would be Spock punching Khan into darkness. That would be not tactics. So those are two things that I think are pretty strong and working for it. Any thoughts on either of those before I kind of get into,
I like your commentary on drone warfare. I think it's very ahead of its time. I took a different approach with that plot device, which is based more on contemporary time. But no, I like the approach you have there in terms of drone warfare. That's very well done.
Appreciate that. And we'll talk about that in the TrekWork we get to a little bit later, because we're going to ask our audience to think about that too. So criticism. What am I not digging so much about this? What revokes pips and makes me derank this episode? Well, let's talk about it. First, the Echo Papa design. You can go read about what it is. It's a pretty cheap model. I know a shampoo bottle is involved. I can't remember what else is, something else, but It doesn't look good. It doesn't age well, and it really doesn't make sense. Okay, so there's one, if it's presumably all of the ones that we see, the one that's following the Enterprise and the one that's on the surface, are all the 607, or some part of the 607 system. Why would you fight the away team within phaser range? Why wouldn't you just obliterate them from the atmosphere? Orbit. You know what I'm saying? That's something that's brought up in Trek later that I love. Data brings that point up later. And, it's something that the Echo Papa could, for all of its intelligence, really, also we learned that its creators just forgot to turn it off or forgot to say end demonstration. And so to me, that also it's not as cool as we're supposed to think it is. It does not pass the rule of cool. That's for sure. Okay, but the big thing about this episode that I just cannot stand, and what you brought up behind the scenes, is what it does with Picard and Beverly. To me, Picard has some of the worst bedside manner ever. And I'll grant him that, to some degree. It might be part of his character, he's awkward with children. He's also awkward with women. I guess he's supposed to be. The sequence alternates for me between tension, Beverly's gonna die, which that speaks to me, to awkward, Picard don't fall asleep, slapping her, then just walking away from her, to revelatory, Picard, we're gonna learn something big about Beverly, she's gonna say these words, and then nope, and then a mysterious conclusion also is supposed to happen in this scene. Picard just ignores Beverly and then finds out about the hologram and then solves everything from there. And Beverly's basically just brushed aside. Yeah. Those two lines where Picard says, there must be a lot of things about you I don't know. And then Crusher says, quite a few. and then totally interrupted. And I hate that with every fiber of my being. I think it is the worst. It's horrible writing. And I like the idea that this thing mirrors the surface, that the characters are having to adapt and work with what is given to them and at hand against a superior enemy. But it doesn't really pay off. In the end, it's just the away team saves them. And we never see what happens to Crusher again. And it's just, there's so much that could have happened. More character building, more backstory revelation, more Picard and Crusher interaction. And the role reversal is interesting. Make Picard the nurse and get into that. Yeah. So for this, I'm going to give this episode the rank of Ensign. 1 solid pip for Starship Tactics. That's Captain Geordi. Nice job. You basically carry the entire episode for me with that.
Yep.
And I'm going to take all other points away because of the totally undeveloped themes in this episode, both what's happening with Picard and Crusher and the idea that these weapons destroy the civilization. That's super interesting and not looked at all. And then Crusher and Picard is just frustrating. So Ensign, I'm handing it over to you after I give this thing the rank of Ensign. What are you thinking, my friend?
So in my situation, I'm going to be a little bit more generous than that. I'm giving this Lieutenant JG 1.5 pips, but we're on a similar wavelength there. In terms of what works for me, this has the potential to be a brilliant commentary on late 1980s insurgent politics, because you have, and this is a common trope in 1980s science fiction, but something that could have really worked brilliantly in this episode is the concept of the arms race, and how you have things like Strategic Defense Initiative, aka Star Wars, a lot of technology that could do us in there. Iran-Contra weapons for hostages scenario. You have the Afghans versus the Soviets.
Absolutely.
Afghanistan. All these sorts of things where we're giving this technology, all these weapons to people who are not beholden to a military, who are not beholden to a government, and now they just have these things. Could there be a problem with that? The answer to that is absolutely there could be. That could have been really interesting to explore. The technological weapon, the holographic decoy, could have been a really cool thing in theory.
Yeah.
It's a chance. In theory, it's a chance at characterization. If they had a chance to develop it, that might be interesting. If an evil AI made a copy of either my wife or our principal and masqueraded as our principal, that could have been an interesting story. One trope to add to your list could be, and this is a common trope in many television shows, is the will they, won't they trope.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And this sets up the will they, won't they trope. And I'm actually kind of okay with Beverly Crusher not revealing her true feelings for Picard, but teasing it. I'm okay with that because it sets up that trope. Because if you take a step back and take a look at, okay, she says she has a crush on him in the first season. Where do you go from there? They have a relationship. Either they get married, they break up, either rinse, dry, and repeat, or something else. So I'm okay with the fact that they dropped that hint, and more blatantly than places like The Naked Now, they explore that issue, and it's the will they, won't they thing. Also,
if I can just say though, for the will they part, they actually have to do something. Hold hands, sit close to each other, acknowledge the depth of the feelings, and then they can't be a will they if they don't. There is no will there if it's like a tiny little hint. But it's interrupted by the hologram. If they would have pursued it even just 1 or 2 lines more, or even had Patrick Stewart acknowledge it, but he doesn't. He's just like, oh, look what I found here. A hologram. I'm with you. I'm almost there, but it's just it's too reserved for that for me. I get nothing from that.
Definitely, and that's why I'd be curious to see, and I might do some digging on this because I'm getting more evidence from this time period. I'd love to see Bob Lewin's notes on this. Because
I would love that.
Had to do with characterization.
Yes.
Also, the role reversal, love that. Picard being in a position where he has to take orders instead of give them, love that. Other good character moments, Geordi in command and consulting Troy.
Yes.
I do like that. What I really don't like about this, real quick, there are too many what, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point, question mark. The what moments. There are too many conveniences. The Enterprise tells Rusher that Drake isn't real, and instead he's a holographic trick, and the holographic Drake is right there. It doesn't do anything. I get it. He's a computer program, but still doesn't work.
Yeah.
The drone, the design looks unfortunate. You said it might have something to do with a shampoo bottle. For me, it looks like something that you could get from an adult bookstore.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Unfortunately,
maybe that's what it is.
It may be. I don't know. It might be something worth something to somebody. So with that said, the biggest unforgivable scene here, the biggest flaw, Picard has no business going down there. Absolutely not. Zero. And that's completely unforgivable. You just spent 2 episodes earlier talking about how Starfleet is a military organization. Respect the chain of command. You wouldn't send your number 1 down there, but I'll give that a pass. If your number 1 has been captured, you don't send the next
go down there.
You don't send the next high-ranking officer down there. This could have been fixed with one scene or one line of dialogue, and here it is. Terrorists. Terrorists have captured the away team, requiring Picard to go down there to mediate. Picard takes Worf. Worf has some times to shine. That's how you fix that. That's how you can organically fix that. And then you find out that there are no terrorists at all. Going back to the technology part, it's all AI.
Yep.
And that gives the big reveal at the end. But I get it. They had problems there with the script. A few lines of dialogue, a few shots could have fixed this and polished this into something brilliant. But this episode fell victim to its own production. So with that said, Scholar Beta, give us TrekWork. What do you got?
Okay, here's what I'm thinking. I want you all out there to redesign the Echo Papa 607 to further explore the intersection of the adaptable killing machine and drone technology, drone warfare. All those historical examples that we talked about with the arms race, the whole point is at some point someone develops a superior technology. So let's see how much more superior this is. Let's see this technology really give, what they have in TNG Arrival. Then, here's the last thing. At the end of the episode, Picard agrees to buy the system, and that's how he's able to shut it off. So I want you to explore how Picard, the new owner of the Papa, might add it to the Enterprise's arsenal. So that's my TrekWork for you. And then let me hit you up with my Enterprise interior really quickly. Won't take but a moment. And it is the Ready Room, featuring acting Captain Geordi. Of course, it was only a matter of time before we talked about the Ready Room. It's an amazing set. I love it. Patrick Stewart talks fondly about it in interviews. Evidently, there were scenes that were shot late into the production cycle of the work week, and these were like Friday night scenes, and he talks fondly about having them in there with Jonathan Frakes and Brett Spiner. So I love that. I love that there's some Shakespeare in there. I love that there's his fish tank in there, his desk, his little chaise lounge. It's an awesome place to get some work done, So that's the that's the Enterprise interior for this episode. The Ready Room, it's missing Picard, but it's got his chair, and it's got Geordi, and it's got Troy, and that's pretty amazing too.
That is. So with that said, folks, hope you're enjoying the new format. I definitely enjoyed the Pips thing personally, and I really like your TrekWork Scholar Beta on Arsenal of Freedom, because I beat my head against the wall for a long time trying to figure out how I would do that. So brilliant there. Stay tuned, folks. Thanks, for next week. You're welcome. Next week, we got Symbiosis. Got a lot of words on that. Skin of Evil, even more words. Yep. And we'll always have Paris to finish it out. We're getting close to the end of season 1. I'm looking forward to seeing what we all think about that. With that said, thank yous are in order, I think. So Scholar Beta, take it away.
Yeah, Memory Alpha, as always, you're an amazing source. All the fans who keep you up, really appreciated reading some behind the scenes. And TrekCore for the scripts, me being able to go back and look up Krios's words, that's super invaluable. Love those caps, especially those Blu-rays, as always. I don't have that yet, someday, but love comparing and seeing that beautiful quality up. And of course, all listeners, anyone who's out there working, remember, you participate, we'll give you the special commendations. It'd be an honor to read your work, to further this podcast. So, anything else you want to mention, my friend?
I'm all good. I'm looking forward to that. Please follow us on Twitter at Trek Teachers. We send our TrekWork up there. We get some materials there. Also, there seems to be interest for the Lost Trek project we keep publishing. We got some feedback on that, so please keep that coming. Cool. I tentatively have some ideas for a spinoff going there that's more historical based, so I can show students how to do public history in as professional a setting as possible. I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to either co-hosting or guest, having you come on as a guest scholar beta for that. I got some ideas in mind for that. I won't say anything on air, but I got some ideas. So,
for that the Lost Trek, I'd love to see one of those old Bob Lewin scripts, if there is one for this episode. That'd be awesome.
Definitely. So with that said, folks, Emalama Pono, especially now, please be safe, be healthy, and live long and prosper.
Peace and long life, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.